Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today we're going to be learning how to draw the face of a tiger. And somewhat unusually for my videos, I've decided to break this into two parts. This is the first part. We're just going to be learning where all the lines go. And then we'll save for a second video all of the shading, the fur, and that kind of stuff. So what I've got here is two squares, about 2 inches, maybe just a little under 2 inches on all sides. Doesn't need to be that small. You can make it any size you want as long as it's proportional. And what I'm going to do now is zoom into this lower square here, because that's where we're going to start placing the facial features. Alright, so I'm going to begin by drawing the eyes, and one thing that I noticed as I studied photographs of tigers is that the eyes are really quite small, proportional to the rest of the face. So pay attention to the size, these sort of seed-shaped eyes, I would describe them as, and try to get them really quite far away from each other in the upper right and left-hand corners of this square. Like I said, the lower of those two squares that you saw before I zoomed in. And so yeah, I think looking at the size of these things, you could fit, I would say, at least 4 between them, if not even 5. That's how small these eyes are in relation to one another, and indeed in relation to the rest of the head. And of course, depending on the degree to which you want the eyes wide open, on the prowl, or whatnot, you'll want to get the pupil either right in the middle, or as I'm doing it, giving the tiger a slightly more relaxed look, getting the pupils near the upper eyelid. Sort of attentive without really that sort of wide-opened eye look. And I think what I'll go ahead and do right now is start to get this shape of the blackness that surrounds the eyes, because it really is sort of an interesting shape that I had never really studied prior to preparing for this video. And you get a really pronounced black area here at the tear duct, or sort of below the tear duct. And it comes down into a slightly forked pattern. Now I got to watch myself, because maybe different breeds of tiger have different patterns, so I don't want to present this as like, okay, all tigers look exactly like this. But in any case, at least some of the photos that I studied had this really quite, I'll go ahead and just blacken it in here. Although, like I said, we're going to do shading. We're going to save that for another video. Notice also that there's a band of blackness beneath and above the eye, but I think the one below the lower eyelid is a little thicker. And then this is going to go off and eventually connect to an area of shading over here. Now, my goal with this video is to lay off the time lapse as much as possible, but there, with a face, there's a lot of symmetry, and so you are going to have a few things where I'm saying, okay, now draw the exact same thing a second time, only this time flipped around, as in the case of the eye here. So I am going to go ahead and kick it into time lapse as I do this second part, but after that we'll come back and talk you through the rest of the placement of the nose and maybe a bit of the mouth as well. Okay, so we've got the eyes in place, and it's time to move all the way down to the bottom of the square, and pretty much the dead center of it is where we're going to begin to place this nose. Now, again, this whole thing was sort of an educational process for me as I studied these photos and learned what a tiger's actual nose looks like. It is sort of an interesting, subtle shape. We sort of imagine it as being roughly like a triangle, and it has a certain triangular aspect to it, but it's rather more complex than that. And, we're just doing the basic guidelines at this stage. But you can see here it almost looks like a letter Y in a way, the way I'm putting this initial guideline in. And then I'm going to come across here and create this sort of curving, dipping line, the curving dipular line. We in the tiger drawing business refer it as the curving dipular line. Anyway, weird, I don't know, things just pop into my head and then I find myself saying them out loud. we'll then adding on here is a line that curves around the edge, and really what you want to focus on is more maybe this lower line. And as it comes down to the base of what I was calling the letter Y here, it actually breaks into two, it sort of divides into two slightly curved bits down here. Hope that's showing up. So I'm coming around here and then also curving up. This line extends past the curving dipular line. And now that we've got that in place, maybe I can go ahead and start to, well, what's going to happen is eventually we're going to get some shading, and this is all going to be defined mainly by way of shading in the second video that I do, but I'll go ahead just to sort of complete it in your mind's eye. This is the snout. The snout of the region. And I'm going to come down here then and start to add a blackish area just below the nose that is going to come down right in between, and then pretty soon after that it breaks into the two sides of the upper part of the snout. And what I'm going to do is, using that, see that edge of the two edges of the square there, maybe just past that is where these two lines will rise up and curve back into the face. Now, I should say that, a lot of people, especially serious artists, may look at my approach to teaching this and say, that's ridiculous. You're just teaching people how to draw the one particular pose of the tiger. You should be trying to, show them the skeletal structure of the head so that they can draw the tiger in any pose, in any direction. And, to be sure, ideally that is the way, if you really want to get serious about drawing tigers, you will want to learn the skeletal structure and so forth. When I do these videos, it's more like giving beginners a little bit of a head start towards producing one good drawing of a tiger. And then, if you find that you're pleased with the results, then you can get more into it and pursue those other ways of drawing a tiger. But this is just sort of allowing you to leapfrog forward to a decent result. So you see how these lines begin to curve up, and that's where we're going to start to get into some of the patterning. Now, I'm probably going to have to break down and do some time lapse of some of this stuff, because boy, the stripes of the tiger are incredibly complicated, way more complicated than I even imagined, and so I don't think we're going to be able to do real time for every single part of it. But how about if we do this? I'm going to put in just a very loose sort of curving placeholder line of where some of the patterning may occur. But before I get too far into that, I think what I will do is do this edge of the upper eye, because these two bits of pattern sort of end up relating to one another. And a little hard to describe this shape here. I guess it is sort of triangular, but it comes, it connects with that outer edge of the eye. And sort of imagine a bit of a triangle. It's sort of two triangles linked together, at least in the photos I studied. You get this first triangle like that, and then sort of a second triangularish thing that comes up like so. And then all of that is eventually going to get blackened in. And I may, as I go, just sort of blacken things in a temporary way. Like I said, I'm going to have a whole separate video where I get into the actual shading of the fur and so forth. So once I've got that in place, you can see that this secondary line here comes very near to it, but doesn't quite touch it. And this is going to be defining the side of the tiger's face. And I'm going to just go ahead and shade that in. And surely different tigers, even probably different breeds, have within a single breed, you may have different striped patterns. But I had to settle on one version that I saw anyway, and I saw mainly two stripes in this area. Two bold stripes that were coming in and sort of angling toward that tear duct without actually reaching all the way to it. So this is, I guess we would say, stripe number 1, and here's stripe number 2. Yes, we have numbered the stripes. Which stripe do you like better, stripe number 1 or stripe number 2? They basically look the same to me, Mark. Why are you asking such dorky questions, man? I'm going to put in a secondary thin line here, and then I noticed that there was sort of a little sort of fanning area of stripes that occur between the eyes, between the eye and these 2 bold stripes that I talked about here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in. It is kind of convenient in a way to have this symmetry because I can do this part real time, and then when we go to the other side of the face, I'll just do all of those stripes in time lapse, and that'll be a big time saver. But I saw 2 stripes like this. They almost look like gills on a fish in a way. 2 sort of longer, bolder stripes up here, and then a couple of smaller secondary stripes. And so you can see it sort of fans together coming down like so. Let's go ahead and do 1 or 2 more of these stripes up here. I'm going to make sure that I'm still within the video frame. I gotta say, you know, the idea of doing something real time and the reality of doing it in real time are 2 different things. You know, you think, boy, if I do this all real time, the people who like to follow along with me are going to be very pleased. On the other hand, I can already see that, you know, a lot of time has gone by just in this intro part, and I may have to, especially when we get up into the forehead, where there is a crazy array of different stripes. That part may have to be time lapse. Anyway, so I'm putting in 2 additional, quite oddly shaped. I don't even know if you would call them stripes, these things, but they're sort of patterns that come up here, and you may choose to connect even over here to that to those 2 triangles that we had done before. But yeah, on just above, and they almost look a little bit like eyebrows, I guess you could say, though they really are just stripes, coming up right here. So let's go ahead then and take a little break from drawing stripes. There's certainly no shortage of that. And I want to talk a little bit about the snout down here. And one thing that I was struck by was that there were kind of rows of these little dots, you know, that you even when you do like a cartoon version of a dog or a cat or something, you tend to put these dots down there at the snout, right? Which comes from reality, basically. And they have these little dots in that area. And so I'm putting sort of guideline stripes here to show you that I was struck by how these dots line up. That it is not a random sort of assortment of dots. They really do line up in neat little rows. And I would say that there are at least 3 or 4 of these rows of dots. And the dots are darker towards the edge, and they get smaller as they reach toward the nose, and they don't actually touch the nose. A lot of this stuff I'm going to be finalizing in this second video, where I will pull out the trusty black Prismacolor and go back into a lot of this stuff. But this gets you the placement of that. And it is looking a little funny because my guidelines are connecting them in a way that they really don't. They don't actually touch one another, I don't think. And that is the sort of pattern that you start to see there in the snout region. Now, let's go ahead and do the lower part of the lower jaw, I guess you just have to call it. And this one, maybe finally we get a shape that's not too hard to replicate. That being said, now I'm going to have to try to describe it. It's boxy. It almost has a sort of stop sign-like look to it, the way I try to remember it, but it's really, in real life, it's probably more rounded. And once you get that in place, you can indicate a little bit of blackness, just the lower lip. Now, if the mouth were wide open, we would see quite a lot more, but with the mouth closed, it's just a tiny little black area there. And there's even sort of like the fur starts to come off. Maybe best to save that for next video, but it starts to fan out a little beneath the mouth there. So I think maybe it's time to do the symmetry thing in time lapse. I'm going to do these other stripes over here just to finish that off. Then we can sort of refocus to get into drawing the ears and the rest of the head. Okay, so sorry for I didn't have the mouth fully in view during that previous bit there. This guy, he's been doing videos for years. He still forgets what can be seen in the camera and what can't. Ugh. In any case, we are putting suggestions of fur here all across this lower area. You know, in this next video that I do next week, we're going to really get into the, you know, the length of the fur, the direction, and so forth. But we're going to be sort of skipping past that in this video. As you can see, there's plenty to do even before you get into the shading. There's just so much with drawing a tiger's face in terms of just getting all the stripes and so forth in the right place. Well, I'm going to refocus now so that we can get the placement of the ears and the rest of the head and so forth, and do as much of that as I can real time before we start winding this video down. Okay, so now it's time to look at this upper square here, because that's going to help us get these lines in the right place. I'm doing the top of the head, and observe the sort of shape that's created. It's quite near this top line, but it doesn't actually touch it. And that is going to tell us where the upper edge of the head is. And just at the where this line, you know, the lines on either side of that box are conveniently tell us where to put the ears. And basically I would say you want to focus on not just the placement of the ears, but the size of them. And if you had drawn this first line in such a way that it extends past, that will also help you to sort of see how high up this ear goes before it stops and begins to curve back down. They are not really triangular shaped. In fact, I'm correcting myself from putting any indication of a point there, because to whatever degree it comes to a point, it's a very, very subtle point, really much more curving in shape. But you want to pay attention to the basic, you know, direction the ear is sort of pointing out a little bit. And the interior, darker area of the ear is largely seen over here on the left. There's going to be tufts of fur here on the inside, on the right-hand side of it, that kind of prevent you from seeing very much in terms of that darkened interior of the ear. And once we've got that in place, let's go ahead and start to continue that line that was the top of the head. Imagine that it continues there behind the ear. You don't have to imagine. I'm sure it does continue behind the ear. What if it didn't, though, man? That poor tiger. Anyway, so I'm curving this line across here, and I guess the trick here is to observe a certain distance there. And I found that the tiger really had, the head was larger than I imagined it would be, and you might start to think, boy, that looks more like a lion than a tiger to me. But again, you know, this is looking at a photo. This is what I saw, and so, you know, hopefully the photos don't lie. So anyway, this certain breed of tiger, anyway, the head is coming quite far out here. And what I'm going to do is, just as a guideline almost, get this to begin to curve back a little bit here. And then I'm getting a more vertical line coming right in here that is not so much the head, that's probably the shoulder, just a little bit of the shoulder that's going to be come into view. And yeah, eventually when we come back next week to do the fur, this whole area, so you're going to see quite long tufts of fur. But it's probably time now to get back into the stripes. As you would imagine, drawing a tiger is really going to be a lot about drawing stripes and placing them, getting them in the right spot. So there's a secondary, very bold stripe that comes right here by the side of the head, by the side of the eyes, I guess you would say. And very kind of rectangular, I suppose, although it begins to trail off down here. And sort of finally disappears as it reaches closer to the snout area. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and darken that in real fast so that we can see that it will indeed eventually be all darkened in. When you get down here, there's this sort of amorphous area of stripes where it's not quite so clear. And that whole area is just eventually going to get shaded in, I think. I'll hold off on doing the whiskers. Let's have that be the last thing. The whiskers will be the last thing I do in this video, but this whole area back here is going to be quite dark by the time we're done with this picture. Just kind of consider this temporary shading, because the real shading, as I keep saying repeatedly, is going to be in next week's video. Now the tricky parts, I think maybe one of the most tricky parts of drawing a tiger, is getting the lines on the forehead, because this is where it really starts to get complicated, and I don't think I can realistically do all of this real time. There's just too many stripes. But I'll give you one little tip. If you put in a guideline right here in the middle, a sort of light vertical guideline here in the middle, that's going to help you understand where most of these stripes point toward. So let's come down here to the bottom of this square, and I'll just do a few of these real time in a pretty rough way. But let's say there's sort of like a flipped V shape going on here. It's pointing up towards that central line. And then a lot of these stripes begin pointing similarly toward that line. So there's sort of it's not random, there's an organization to the stripes and where they're pointing, most of them anyway, maybe not all of them, but they do sort of head towards that line. And then, you know, when we do the symmetrical part of it, in fact, some of them may even run along that line. But when you start getting symmetrical, you flip it around, and all these lines also sort of, it's like they're being pulled up in a way towards that central line. And so if you've got that in place, that will give you a sort of organizational, structural principle towards getting these lines in the right place. Boy, this feels like a long video. This is going to be one of my long ones. This is where in the comment section people are like, I like your videos, but you talk too much. And there's this, and I agree. Yes, I do talk too much. Maybe it's time to go back to the time lapse, but then the people hate the time lapse, and so I get. It's the warring tribes of the Mark Crilly comment section. Some people think the videos are to have too much time lapse. They want them to have more real time. Other people feel that they are too long and too much talking. So what are you going to do? Anyway, I think this idea of doing the symmetrical stuff in time lapse is going to maybe rescue me from making this video any longer than it needs to be. But you can see how, as I got up here, you have these very vertical stripes coming up towards the center. Over here, they start to sort of follow along more towards the, with that upper curving line of the head. And maybe that'll do it for that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to kick it into time lapse. I'm going to do all of this sort of flipped over stuff, symmetrical stuff. I'm going to do all of this in time lapse, and that'll maybe leave us enough time to do the whiskers, and that'll be plenty, I think, for this first video. So, time lapse time, people. Okay, so you can see I sort of went ahead and started doing an indication of the back of the tiger and the way the stripes are seen curving across the sort of shoulders and so forth. That is not going to be the focus of this illustration, but I thought I'd go ahead and just get that in there as something to finish it off. And yeah, for maybe the last thing that I can do in this current video is to talk about the whiskers. I'm going to refocus the camera so that we can do that part. Okay, so I'm going to put down some lines for the whiskers. This is going to be the trickiest part of the video in a way in terms of deciding how I want to do this, because the whiskers in real life are white, which really requires, I don't know, pulling out some white gouache or something. I may try that, or we may just live with the unrealistic aspect of these whiskers being done black. since it's so much easier to do these black lines. But anyway, I'll sort of, whoops, sorry about that, knocking my camera all over the place. We'll sort of figure that out when we get to it. But the main thing to focus on for now is the direction and the curve of these whiskers. Up here, sort of horizontal in orientation, and then gradually fanning out. And I'd say the last of the whiskers is visible anyway, somewhere over here to the left of the lower jaw. And they do, pretty much all curve in the same direction, but as I said, sort of fanning up into a more of a horizontal orientation. And I guess I can just go ahead and in real time do the whiskers over here as well. So let me know what you think about this approach of splitting a video into two. It's a bit of a risk, I must say, because I do fear some people will be like, boy, I'm not interested in drawing a tiger, so I'm just going to check out of Mark Crilly's videos for the next 2 weeks. Nothing for me to see here. But I did feel, like in other videos in this kind of series, the fur part of it, the shading part of it, always gets shortchanged because I'm spending so much time putting down the basic guidelines. I felt, boy, this time let's try the approach of having a whole separate video that is dedicated to nothing but drawing the fur, and then we can finally give that part of the drawing its due. So, yeah, let me know in the comment section if you like the idea of doing occasional, I'm not saying all the time, but occasional two-part videos like this, where you get much more real-time instruction, though of course it does, has the drawback of asking you to wait a whole nother week to get to the finish of it. I don't think it's not like, oh, let's do every video like this. No, that far from it. I can't imagine doing this more than 2 or at most 3 times in a year, I'm thinking. But anyway, you can see me already starting to lapse into shading time, which was not going to be the focus of this video. We'll hold off and do that next week. Hang on a second, I'll grab my books so I can thank the people who have supported me by getting them, and then we'll wind this video down. Okay, so we can see finally the halfway point, I would call this. By no means are we done with this illustration. Long way to go in terms of the shading, but you've got the basic look here, and maybe for some of you that's all you want to do is just a sort of a light sketch like this and leave it at that. But let me go ahead and thank anyone who has supported me by getting any of my books. We got Brody's Ghost and Miki Falls, my graphic novel series, as well as Mastering Manga 1 and 2. I've heard from a lot of people who got this for Christmas. Thank you so much for requesting that as a Christmas gift. It really was delightful on Twitter and Facebook and so forth to see so many people posting photos and so forth, letting me know that they got the books. But let me go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.